and in what can only be described as, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on the radio, but as a monumental dick move on the part of the president, on the part of the Trump administration. The Trump administration is pursuing a new rule that could throw millions of people off food stamps. It's millions of mothers, millions of children, millions of people in need around the country. And here to talk about it, hopefully with a more professional gloss and tone than I've given to it, is one of my favorite people. Rebecca Vallas is vice president of the Poverty to Prosperity program at the Center for American Progress. She does great work there. She's also the host of a program called Off Kilter. It's a podcast produced by Cap Action, or it says here powered by Cap Action, but I don't know exactly what that means. And she joins us now. So first of all, Rebecca Vallas, thanks for coming back on the program.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me back, RJ. I love being part of the We Act Radio family with you.
Well, we love having you. And okay, so I'm sorry for my slightly unprofessional framing of the Trump administration's new move. Perhaps you can tell us in a more, perhaps you can tell us in a better way what this is all about.
Well, you may have been crass in your opening, RJ, but you certainly were not inaccurate. What Trump has done this week can really best be described as a major regulatory attack on low income folks, on working class folks in this country. And in his crosshairs this particular week, because yes, it seems like there's another attack on poor people pretty much every day under this administration. In the crosshairs this week is the food stamp program, which today is called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Used to be called food stamps, helps about 40 million people put food on the table in any given month. That is the program that Trump has now announced he wants to slash in huge ways unilaterally by sidestepping Congress and pushing forward a proposed rulemaking. I know that sounds like a wonky term, but that's the technical term, a proposed rulemaking that he says he has the authority to move forward without any approval from Congress. And so that is what's on deck for this particular week. You mentioned in your opening, RJ, that the bottom line here is that 3.1 million Americans, more than 3 million Americans, stand to lose really meager but vital food assistance in the form of food stamps if this rule takes effect. And that's not me saying that. That's not the Center for American Progress. That's actually the Trump administration's own estimate from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, telling us that that is what will happen if their rule takes effect. And in some ways, it's almost as though they've been bragging for the past couple of days that they want to take food away from 3.1 million hungry people. We can get into the details of exactly how this particular regulatory attack would work and why it's so nefarious, but that's the bottom line that we heard out of the Trump administration this week.
Well, here's my, perhaps rudimentary understanding of it, okay? That my understanding of it is that when you applied for an assistance program, this is the way it's been working. And if you apply for an assistance program and your paperwork shows that you need food assistance, you get food assistance. And that what the Trump administration would now say is, no, that's not enough. We're not, any food assistance you're getting that way stops. You don't get it. You have to go through a whole other process and you might or might not get it. Is that more or less accurate?
I'd say that you're warm, RJ, but this one's real wonky. So I want to kind of de-wonkify it a little bit so people can have a sense of what's going on here. And in particular, because we've got a lot of right-wing folks out of the Trump administration and out of some Koch-funded think tanks who are making it sound like this is a technical change or like it's closing some kind of a loophole when that could not be further from the truth. So the change that the Trump administration is proposing here by fiat, not taking this to Congress, saying he wants to do this just through a sort of a backdoor attack on the SNAP program, is frankly about the most anti-work pro-poverty type of policy that you could cook up if you were really trying to do that, RJ? If you had those goals of stopping people from being able to work and stopping people from being able to get ahead. And the reason that I say that is because this rule is a full frontal attack on a really wonky sounding provision in the food stamp program that is all about making sure that people are able to transition off of receiving food stamps and into decent paying jobs for what the Trump administration always talks about that they supposedly care about, which is this concept of self-sufficiency. And so this categorical eligibility, that's the wonky sounding provision that's under threat here. Categorical eligibility has been this basically 20-year and really successful experiment in the states that about 43 states have taken up over the years to explicitly run their SNAP programs in ways that allow people to get ahead and move up in the workforce. So let me make that concrete and give it an example. One of the big ways that this categorical eligibility program and provision helps people get ahead and allows states to help people get ahead is by making sure that people don't fall off of a steep benefit cliff, sort of another technical term that I'll explain, when they get a raise at work. So take a parent with a couple of kids who maybe is making, say, $12.50 an hour. They're at about 125% of the federal poverty level. They're getting about $161 in SNAP every month to help them put food on the table because that $12.50 an hour wage isn't enough to live on. And we all know that as we're pushing for $15 an hour as a minimum wage in this country. Now, if this rule takes effect and that mom with those two kids now gets even just a 50-cent raise at work, she is going to see her SNAP benefits go way down, and the family is actually going to be worse off than if she hadn't gotten the raise in the first place. That's the type of policy that this categorical eligibility, wonky sounding thing is allowing states to fix so that we don't have anti-work incentives baked into a program that's helping people put food on the table. That is the type of policy that Trump is saying he doesn't want to allow states to continue to push forward. And instead, he wants to push that mom and her kids off of a cliff when they get that raise at work. That's the message coming out of this rule because of what it would mean in the SNAP program. And one other key example that I'll offer of how this categorical eligibility thing that's now under attack by the Trump administration has been helping families get ahead. It gives states the flexibility to allow families to save and plan for the future by amassing more than just a little tiny amount of money in the bank, like a couple $1,000s. And so what this rule would do, if it takes effect, is to force states to punish families for doing the right thing, which is to save modest amounts of money for a rainy day, the thing that families are told to do every day by conservatives in this country. That's what this rule would do, and that's why I'm saying that it basically would set fire to the very bootstraps that conservatives are always telling low-income families to pull themselves up by.
So other than this being completely horrible, I have two reactions to it. One is, perhaps of lesser importance than the other, but, I'd love your thoughts on both. The small one, but not insignificant, is it strikes me that it's extremely hypocritical of so-called conservatives who are always talking about states' rights and states' abilities to make their own decision being in sort of and resistance to the federal government being a core value of theirs. This sounds like a rule that overrides the ability of states to make the determination they think is best for their own people. So that may be a littler thing, but it seems grossly hypocritical. It may or may not be accurate, but the big issue to me is obviously the impact, the human impact this has on millions of people, including men, women, and children, and the elderly and the ill, and anyone who might be able to go out and work part-time or full-time trying to get ahead. And it strikes me, the word that kept coming to mind, Rebecca Vallas, while you were talking was punitive. That once again we see, and to me this isn't just Trump, it's the right and it's Republicans as a group. We see this sort of punitive attitude towards the poor, as if they may talk about how they want the poor to get ahead and how capitalism lifts their branch of, free market, whatever, lifts all boats, and that conservatism is really going to help the poor not be poor anymore. But at the end of the day, it seems like they don't want to help the poor. They want to punish the poor. And it just seems punitive to me. But I don't know if you think I'm off base on one or both of those things.
RJ, you're hitting the nail on the head on both fronts. And let me start with the state flexibility and states' rights piece, because you are so spot on that is really at the core of what makes this rule so incredibly hypocritical. You hear every single day, not just from this administration, but from conservatives writ large, that state flexibility, states' rights, these are principles that we must hold sacred. And yet now what we're looking at in this rule could not be a more full frontal, direct attack on state flexibility, because that's what categorical eligibility, that wonky provision I was explaining before, is all about. Giving states the flexibility to make their SNAP programs help families get ahead so that people aren't trapped in poverty. Your listeners and viewers may remember Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House. He used to talk all the time about cutting back on poverty traps and how we needed to make sure that our safety net programs weren't a poverty trap. That's exactly what the current policy of categorical eligibility has been all about, and that's why we've seen 43 some states take it up in varying forms to successfully help families work their way off of benefits like SNAP. So I think it's fair to say, RJ, as you said, just to sort of finish that thought, that I guess Trump is a huge fan of state flexibility and states' rights, except when it helps low-income folks. I think that's probably the takeaway from this rule. The second form of hypocrisy that you are so right to call out is this administration and conservatives generally. I mean, they talk all the time about work and wanting to be pro-work. And in fact, that's actually the stated rationale behind this rule from the administration, is that they want people to be self-sufficient, a word that they throw around all the time, even though it's not something that they would want, say, wealthy people to be, because they're much too busy giving them massive tax breaks so that people with yachts can buy second yachts to put inside their first yachts. But I digress. That's really what we're actually seeing this rule do, is fly straight in the face of all the types of policies that evidence has now told us work for supporting people in getting ahead for all the reasons I was describing. And so this really is an anti-work, anti-states' rights proposal coming out of this administration. And I want to make one additional point here about the politics of this, because part of what is so weird about this proposal and really deserves to be called out, and is starting to get called out now by a growing chorus in the Congress, is that not only is this proposed rule an end run around Congress, because it's a proposed rulemaking, it's an administrative action and not a piece of legislation that Congress has an opportunity to weigh in on, but this is actually a proposal that Congress itself explicitly rejected on a bipartisan basis as recently as December, when it was put in front of them as part of a debate over the food stamp program that was in the form of the Farm Bill, the authorizing legislation that actually allows the food stamp program to be funded year after year. And so as part of that debate, we saw Republicans join forces with Democrats in saying no to exactly this proposal. It was eschewed from the final deal, and so Trump didn't get his way, and he ended up having to eat crow and sign a bill into law that he didn't like. And that is exactly what he's doing here, is to turn right around, just like he did with healthcare when he didn't get his way, didn't get the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, didn't get to gut Medicaid legislatively. We've watched him do everything he can to sabotage both in the months that have followed. Now he's using the exact same playbook to try to dismantle the food stamp program, the nation's largest food assistance program, brick by brick by brick. And this proposed rule that we watched come out of this administration this week comes on the heels of an earlier proposed rule that was just yet another of the specific proposals that bipartisan members of Congress have now rejected within the past year, and Trump is still hell-bent on trying to push forward unilaterally and through circumvention of Congress. So that's just another note I wanted to make on the politics here, given how brazen this attack is by this president, and frankly, how unbelievably heart-wrenching it is to see how much this president is obsessed with the idea of taking away $1.40 per person per meal away from the poorest people in this country.
Yeah, it's tragic. And I'll close with a two-part, we only have a minute left, but a two-part question, I guess, which is, one is what's likely to happen next? And two, more importantly, is there anything people can do to try to make their voices heard about this?
You're asking the $1 million question, or I guess I should say the $2.5 million question, because that's what Trump says he will cut from the food stamp program every single year moving forward if this rule takes effect. And it's probably not a bad time to remind your viewers and listeners that just last year in the Trump tax law, Trump gave more in tax cuts to the top 1% than the cost of the entire food stamp program. So just a little bit of a reminder of where his priorities lie in case anyone was still confused. But everything that folks need to know about what happens next, which is an opportunity to comment on this rule, public comments, in the next 60 days, is at handsoffsnap.org, handsoffsnap.org, handy comment tool there that the Center for American Progress has pulled together to make commenting as easy as just putting a few sentences into a little comment generator that will send your thoughts straight to the U.S. Department of Agriculture as part of the rulemaking process. And Trump is legally required, his administration is legally required to read and review every single unique comment that they receive in the next 60 days. So it is well worth everyone's time taking action. We have watched comments be the thing that can stop rules from taking effect when they shine light on excesses in terms of the president's exercise of legal authority, or poke other holes in the proposal and the process that the administration has used. So handsoffsnap.org. It only takes a couple of minutes, and it is well worth your time to try to save food for 3.1 million people.
Well, I'm going to go to handsoffsnap.org because I know that the best way to make Trump administration officials miserable is to make them read something. So Rebecca Vallas, Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress, host of the Off Kilter podcast right here at We Act Radio. As always, great to talk to you. Really important subject. Thanks for enlightening us on it.
Thanks so much, RJ. Really appreciate you shining some light on it.